I gotta move this side. All right. Hey everyone. It's
Hi.
7 p.m. Eastern, so I know everyone's all over the all over the world. Forget the country at this point.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, Ellie and I are going to be talking about everything that is taboo with military sexual trauma. We're going to be talking about BDSM. We're going to be talking about kinks. We're going to be talking about sexuality. Obviously, you guys know that we've covered various topics before, but this is always a topic that people are interested in. They ask us questions about. So we figured that we would have a more in-depth dialogue today on it to educate everyone on like what happens, what's taboo about MST that happens after you go through military sexual trauma. So that's really what today's conversation is about. And I know for myself personally, after I went through sexual violence in the military myself, my sexuality was greatly impacted. Last week I wrote a perspectives piece and I did a piece on hypersexuality and how the trauma impacted my brain chemicals that led me towards hypersexuality. That's not the only outcome that happens with survivors when they're trying to navigate and figure out control after it was taken away, right? Because rape in and of itself is about someone overpowering you without your consent and taking control away from you, taking power away. So, what happens to people's sexuality is that they try to navigate a system in a way where they're getting back their power. So, that's a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. And Ellie has openly talked about her struggles. Hey, thank you. Has openly talked about her struggles with becoming bisexual after going through rape. So Ellie, I want to just hear a little bit of your story for you to share with the community about like some of the struggles you had, and then I'll get into some of my kinks and things like that.
Yeah. So it's first of all, if anyone's watching this and they are bisexual, that's cool. You're valid and you're welcome and you're safe here. Um, for me, there was always, a little interest, mainly in boobs. And when I was sexually assaulted, well, when I was raped, my relationship with males and men and generally the masculine became so toxic that I kind of sought comfort in the arms of a lady, um, multiple times, often, and still do. So that was it for me in that sense. The floodgates opened when I was sexually traumatized, because I still felt safe in the feminine, and I wanted to continue to explore my sexuality, but I was so terrified of doing that with men. And so what was probably just, a little bit bi-curious before became full-fledged queer flag blazing bisexuality pretty much overnight. And for a long time, the only way I could feel safe having sexual intimacy with a man is if another woman was there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I've had a number of threesomes, loved all of them, would recommend. If everybody wants to have that threesome, would recommend. But now I'm married to a man. Crazy how these things work out. And femininity is still very important to me within my sexuality. We've had threesomes within our marriage before. And also just like really simple things, like if I watch porn, I watch lesbian porn,
Okay.
so yeah, that's essentially how it is for me.
See, when I first went through sexual violence in the Marine Corps, like when I first got out, I did not carry relationships, but I was like hooking up with women because I was like, fuck the male species. Like, fuck anything that has a penis. I want nothing to do with anything that has a penis because I felt like that's where my power was taken away.
Yeah.
So I was like, but then the thing was, like, I wasn't enjoying myself. And I was like, I'm not attracted to women. Like, I'm attracted to men, but I'm terrified of men. I'm terrified of what they're capable of doing. And I'm terrified of them always looking out for themselves and not, you know, taking care of my boundaries and what makes me feel good. Or like the constant pressure to give them more than what I was willing to give them. So that was something that I really had a struggle with. But then, like, for me, also, it came down to the fact of like when I was going through everything that I was dealing with, you know, I was questioning like my sexuality and I was, you know, like regular sex just was not a thing for me anymore. Like, I didn't go down the threesome route because like I would never want to be overpowered by another human. And I feel like a threesome situation that's possible. So for me, it was like that was a turnoff. But what it came down to was like BDSM like became my kink. Where I had no interest in BDSM before sexual trauma. And when I got out of the Marine Corps, like BDSM was everything for me to be able to orgasm. Because like what would happen is that I would go through these points of like I would have to role play the trauma that I went through. And when you're talking about like going through starvation, when you're talking about getting hazed, when you're talking about like getting beat, when you're talking about getting chairs thrown at you, choked, like all of those things that happen as trauma also transcend because during your sex life, you're trying to turn that pain into pleasure. And you're trying to process out that information and trying to have power over this trauma that happened to you. So, like, what was really crazy is after I got out the Marine Corps, like, I would not enjoy sex unless there were like these prisoner of war scenarios that replicated the trauma that I went through. And it was so deeply embarrassing to talk to a partner about it because it's like, so I have this kink. I don't want to tell you why I have this kink. You know, I've been through some shit, but like, let's role play X, Y, and Z. And then like the dude's like, so I've been with a lot of girls before, and like this one's kind of hardcore. You know, why are you into this? And then I'm like, oh, you know, I'm just into it. Like it's just kind of like a fetish from watching porn, but in reality, it was my trauma.
Yeah.
And I also like didn't know how to talk about like how I developed this kink. Or even if it was healthy or not. Like that was something else that I had to learn to navigate. And like I wouldn't learn to navigate that until therapy, where like I sat down with my doctor and my doctor was like, well, you're trying to, you know, have a sense of power over a situation in which you felt powerless. And, you know, going through that kind of situation, you know, it adversely impacted your well being. So it's natural for you to be at this point trying to recuperate and trying to, you know, gain the sense of power over what happened to you. And I was like, okay, so this makes sense now. Now how do I tell a partner this? And you know what I mean? And that like really became the awkward part because now it's like, how do I sit here and communicate with a partner like, hey, my trauma impacts my sex life. And for me to like bond with you, not only do I need to feel extremely safe with you, not only do I need my boundaries respected, but I have these really weird kinks that I like need to play into and these power dynamics for me to enjoy sex. And like that was something that was like super hard for me to navigate. And honestly, it's still something I struggle with. Like, it's not an easy conversation to have because then you're like, is he gonna think I'm weird? Or like, if the guy is really vanilla, then you're like, okay, if he's vanilla and I'm not vanilla, we're not sexually compatible because Yeah, and like also when you go through these traumas as a child or what your teens or what preteens and your brain is developing, your brain solidifies these connections.
Yes.
So when you get to that point that that's happening, you're now in a space of like, this is who I am. This is now part of my identity, and this is what I enjoy. I don't enjoy vanilla sex. I don't enjoy, like boring sex. Like and like for me, replaying my trauma helps me feel a sense of power over it, right? When I can turn my pain into pleasure, it helps me feel a sense of power over what has happened to me versus like, woe is me, I'm a victim, to like, okay, I converted my emotions here and now I feel powerful in the situation and I feel relief and I
Yeah.
feel good. And I don't think a lot of people really understand that about BDSM or other types of kinks, because I know so many people in the community who have kinks. Like it's probably a conversation that we have all the time. I
And
want to,
it never gets old
yeah, like
because there aren't very many spaces where people feel like they can talk about this stuff.
yeah, we're like, for us, it's like we're asking advice, like, is this kink healthy or how do I handle this situation?
Yeah.
I have this kink and like this is what I want to do, or like even with some men like who've gone through sexual violence where they have kinks of like getting dressed as women during sex, but also at the same time like liking females, or people who become pansexual. Like that's a huge thing in our community with people who go through sexual violence and then become pansexual. And it's like people's sexuality and what they like in their kinks, they evolve. Like some people totally like getting treated like a prisoner, and they like taking BDSM to extremes and even in their relationships, and not just in the bedroom. So it's like sexual violence, specifically military sexual trauma, really adversely impacts people's like sexuality, their lives, their kinks, what they like, what they don't like all of that comes into play.
Yeah. Like I know, like, so there was like pre-trauma and then after trauma. And I remember because like masturbation, since we're talking taboo, is often the way really like those fantasies that we have, that's often how we discover it.
Right.
And all after I was raped, I kept masturbating about being choked. And I remember being like, well, says I wearing a choker. But that came out of nowhere. That wasn't something I don't think I'd ever considered. I'd never thought about it. And then all of a sudden, here I was 6 months, a year after being raped, asking people to choke me, right?
Yeah.
And it's such a detrimental effect. It's such a strong effect. And you need to learn how to do it healthily. Or BDSM can be really dangerous.
Right. And it's not like you get the proper sex education you need anyway. And then you go through sexual violence and your brain gets super fucked. And what you end up doing is re-victimizing yourself or getting raped again or going through sexual assault again, because now it's like you don't know how to communicate your boundaries of like, where do we stop? Where does this become exciting and where does this become trauma all over again? And it's like we don't, as an American society as a whole, the education system does a piss poor job at talking about sexuality, at talking about sexual violence, and then talking about the aftermath of sexual violence. And it's like when you put all of that together, you go into the military, you deal with sexual violence, and then you come out and they're like, oh, well, you don't have PTSD and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, I don't even know what's going on with me. I don't know why I feel like this. I don't know why I want to fuck everything that crosses my path, but I'm terrified of everything that crosses my path. I have no idea what's going on here. And then at the same time, you don't even know how to communicate, and you're not even self-aware of what's happening to you. So what happens is you go down a road of getting re-victimized over and over and over again, where you're playing out these trauma patterns, and then you're getting a negative attraction pattern, or what they call a trauma bond.
Yes.
And you become almost addicted to the trauma because you believe that that's what you're worth, instead of learning what the tools are of like, okay, let me get myself healthy. Let me go to the VA. Let me go to therapy. Let me get on medication. And now that that's under control, let me discuss my sexuality. And now, what are the boundaries?
Yeah.
How do I feel empowered during sex? Vanilla sex no longer works for me. Vanilla sex is never going to work for me again. BDSM is my shit. Okay, what's the boundaries here? Do I want it in my daily life? Do I want it just in the bedroom? What is our stop and go? Like, are we using colors? Like, what are we do? What's the boundaries?
Mm-hmm.
And then also, like, there aren't these conversations of, before we get involved in sex, before we start fucking, what are the boundaries? Normally, it's just people like jumping into sex, and then you're like in the middle of sex, and you're like, I don't want to go that far. I don't want to go that far. And sometimes it's too late to have that conversation at that point. And it's like, you really got to have these conversations at a time to feel safe with what the boundaries are. So that way everyone who's involved is having a fun and safe and enjoyable time, and having sex that's geared towards healing, and I think a lot of times that's what people do not keep in mind when they're thinking about sexuality or sex after MST. Your life is going to change. Your sex life is going to change. It's not going to be the same. Maybe if you're like 30 or 40 when you went through it and your brain was developed fully, you might be able to recover faster. But like, if your neurotransmitters were still developing and connecting, your life is not going to be the same. And like, going forward, this is what you have to deal with. So now, instead of being ashamed of it and hiding it, it's, let's put the elephant in the room out there, and let's educate people about what the experience is like, so you can get the tools and resources you need. Rape is not normal. Rape is not okay. The aftermath on how everyone copes and responds becomes either healthy or unhealthy. So when certain things happen, or they become a part of your identity, it becomes a point of, how do we just learn to deal with this and move forward now that it is part of our identity?
Because BDSM, kink play, three-ways, orgies, I don't know, it can all be healthy, and it can all actually be incredibly healing, but you have to go about it in, I think it was Jessica last week who said safe, sane, and consensual.
Right, I love that. Loved it.
I love it too. We're bringing it back. You have to go about it in that way.
In that way, yeah.
You can cause yourself more damage. You can cause yourself more trauma. And also, we, talking more about sex education, we grow up with poor sex education, and also often a homophobic society. So if you go through sexual trauma, and then as a result of that become hypersexual, start having kinky sexual relations with people of your own biological sex or your own gender, and you have internalized homophobia on top of the trauma that you're already experiencing, that's so dangerous. And it just amplifies the shame, which is why we will and do actively support the LGBTQ plus community as a movement, as an individual. We recently had National Coming Out Day, and we are a community that's safe for you to come out to. But that it's just, homophobia is a part of rape culture, whether we like it or not. It is a feminist issue, and that's why it is relevant for us to talk about, because it can make people's shame cycles so much more painful than they already are.
Right. And I think one of the things that happens is when you go through shame, when you go through sexual violence, and then you go through the shame that comes with what's happening to you, you feel A, worthless, and B, you feel misunderstood. And then that profound level of shame, you're just like, I want to kill myself because I can't get out of this cycle. Like, I'm addicted to sex. My sexuality is all fucked up. I don't even know who I am anymore. I don't know what to do with my life. I don't want to be in love. I don't want anybody to come near me. I just want to fuck. And that's all I want to do. And then you're like, but I don't know why I'm like this and what happened to me, you know? And then it becomes this cycle of shame where you're like, enough's enough. I don't want to live anymore. This is living in hell. And then you're trying to navigate how to heal. And then no matter where you turn to, it's like, well, be celibate. Don't do anything. Don't, just leave it alone. Like, it'll pass. Just like everything else passes, it'll pass. And you're like, and then you're like, you don't understand. You don't understand what the hell is going on in my brain and in my life and what I'm going through. And you're like, the whole abstinence and the nun story is not going to work for me. I'm just trying to figure out how to be safe. I'm trying to figure out how to be able to be normal within the context of the trauma that I've been through. And I don't know what to do, right? And I don't know where to go. And I don't know who to turn to because no one wants to have this conversation publicly. So then you go through trial and error. And you're like, oh, let me try this and see if I like it. And then you're like, what the fuck was I doing? This is not what I like. And I think that if we have these conversations, we remove the stigma of having these conversations, and then we just have honest conversations about sex, because the reality is it's a biological function. Eating is a biological function. Like, you're not going to stop eating because you got food poisoning. You're not going to stop drinking water because you got water poisoning, right? Like, those are biological functions. So you're not going to stop fucking because you went through sexual violence.
No.
If anything, it's just going to compromise trying to navigate how to go back to having sex in a safe way. But, like, obviously you're still going to have those urges. And then you have the other side of it of like, okay, well, if I don't want to have sex, do I masturbate? And if I masturbate, does it go against my religion? Does it go against my culture? And then you're like, you know what? No matter what road I take, I'm screwed. No matter what road I take, I'm judged. So then you're like, I'm just going to figure this shit out on my own. And then that's where all the errors happen. And then you're like, but I'm getting re-victimized. I don't want to do this. And then it becomes trial and error. And it's like, if we just were open about having these conversations of like, hey, this happens after sexual violence. This is what we go through. Like, these are the feelings that we're dealing with after we go through sexual violence. Like, this is what happens. I feel like if we normalize the conversation between what happens to survivors after they go through sexual violence, it creates a community that is safe for everyone to talk and open up. Because I'm telling you, the stuff that I have learned from the community blows my mind, from fetishes to kinks to BDSM to pansexuality to bisexuality. Like, everything I've learned about people after going through sexual violence, like, blows my mind, where I'm like, holy shit, I can relate, because there was changes in my sexual identity. But to see how broad a spectrum they are, it really does blow my mind.
Yeah, and then even, we are definitely on the hypersexual end of things, but you also have the hyposexual end of things, and people who feel that they become upon the asexual spectrum, and people who, like males who suffer with erectile dysfunction as a result of all of this. Well, they still want sexual pleasure.
Right.
They still want a sex life.
Right.
So it's such a broad topic, and I think a lot of the taboo comes from a religion,
Right.
But B, I think it's so broad that no one knows what to say.
Mm.
You know, I think people kind of get overwhelmed by all of it, and so they just shut down. And it's just, no, just start talking, because
Right.
you would be surprised the people in your life who have experienced the same thing or are experiencing the same thing.
Well, I think that's kind of like what happened with us, right? Like we were all working on MIRA at the time, which became the I Am Benissagian Act, but like we're all talking about our sexuality like behind the scenes while we were going through things. And like, you know, one of the conversations we were having was that like, you know, people who don't survive, that are non-survivors, never know what their sexuality was going to turn out to. And then we all started talking about our sexualities and we're like, yeah, because, you know, surviving sexual violence definitely fucks with the rest of your life in every capacity. And I remember we were just talking about like, we were talking about fertility, we were talking about relationships, we were talking about pregnancy, and we were talking about sexuality. And when the topic of sexuality came up, it was like, whoa, you know, everyone was like, yeah, I'm into BDSM too after sexual violence. Me too, you know, and I'm bisexual. I'm into BDSM hardcore and I'm pansexual. And it was like everyone kind of started like coming out talking about it.
Yeah.
And then people were like, I have this kink that I like to dress up and do this, and I have this kink, and I'm like, I have this kink. Like everybody just kind of like opened up about the conversation while we were working on our lobbying efforts, because that was one of the main things that we were talking about in terms of, you know, when we were talking to Congress about education, like there's a severe lack of education in what happens to survivors after the fact. And I remember like, you know, we brought that up when for the I Am Benissagian Act, when they were talking about the training portion was going to be delayed till later.
Yeah.
And this needs to be put in here because, you know, at the end of the day, like this is common. This happens to survivors on a regular basis. And this has to get addressed because, you know, the profound level of shame that you go through because you don't feel like you're normal, when in reality, your trauma response is normal, because like you should have never gone through the trauma in the first place.
Yeah.
So
well, sex is political. It
100%.
absolutely is political, in the same way that food banks are political. People
Right.
need food.
Right.
And I think the instinct is you can't talk about sex when it comes to politics. Well, until people stop politicizing women's bodies without their consent, and particularly women of color,
Right.
until then, we're going to keep talking about sex politically.
Right. I mean, we are the military sexual trauma movement, so we're going to talk about sex and trauma. Which I think has something that has always blown my mind. Like when people are like, oh my God, you're talking about sex. And I'm like, yeah, because it impacts everything. Like you have to have sex to have a baby, right? Like you have to have a functional relationship to even get pregnant. You know, you have these fucking fetishes, so now you gotta find a partner who's down for your fetishes and who's cool with it. Like it fucks everything up, literally everything. And then people are like, oh, I don't know if we should talk about that. And you're like, that's why you're not here, and that's why you're not doing this, and this is why MSTM is doing this. Like you don't have the courage to have the conversation that is necessary for us to have to make sure that when people are going through these circumstances, they have the resources that they need to thrive. You know, and that's something how I always look at it. And I think all of us look at it that way, because like even this live, like this was pushed by everybody. Everyone's like, so you're gonna do the taboo one, right? So you're gonna talk about when are you talking about BDSM?
And here we are.
Yeah, because so much of the community is like, let's get with this and let's bring this conversation forward because it happens. And then like, what do you do too with the families who are going through these struggles now? You know, their sons and their daughters come home and all of a sudden they're not the same person. And like now they're being judged on top of the trauma versus having a family that's supportive and understands, okay, my child went through sexual violence. My child went through retaliation. We need to get them in therapy. We need to get them on medication. And you know what, there might be some new behaviors they have. Let's figure out with the doctor what's healthy and what's not, and help navigate this and make it a little easier for them, and keep the family intact. Because I remember even with my own family, my family had not a fucking clue what was going on when I was going through everything. Because one, I didn't talk about it. I didn't tell, honestly, when I went through MST, like when I got out of the Marine Corps, I was like, I am never telling anyone that I have ever gone through this. Like I'm keeping this shit to myself and I'm taking it to the grave with me. Like that was my game plan. So like when I got home and I started like acting out and I was like getting addicted to drugs and I was like all over the place and I was getting involved in the sex and drug trade, like my parents obviously saw that and we're having these conversations like, this isn't healthy, Janelle. You know, you're a straight A student, you were doing things with your life, like we don't know what happened, what's going on, why are you going down this road? And like they just thought I was like being a bad teenager, and like they couldn't understand it because like growing up, like I was a straight A student, I skipped 11th grade, I graduated with honors, I graduated in the top 20% of my class. So it's like here I am, like, and I'm on, like, I was doing boxing, I won 2 state championships, I was doing soccer, we won state championships. Like I was like Miss Goody Two Shoes at the top of everything. And then like I come back and I'm like, where's the acid at? Like what other drugs are there? There's PCP? Let me get some of that. Okay, can I mix it with some cocaine? And like I was just going down a rabbit hole. And then I'd be like, yo, where's the alcohol at? I just want to drink all day. Like I was a train wreck, like a literal train wreck. And my parents had no idea what was going on. And that's why I think it's important to have these conversations, because the reality of it is like these taboos that we don't talk about are a matter of life or death.
Yeah.
You know, and like one of the reasons I went and I attempted to commit suicide was because of the fact that I felt so much shame and humiliation, and I felt that I had no one to talk to. I was like, no one's gonna understand me. If I tell people that I got treated like a prisoner of war on US soil, people are gonna think I'm anti-military. I can't get benefits, like I have no access to medical, like I'm stuck in the sex and drug trade. I don't even know how to get out from here. Like my brain is fucked. Like I didn't even understand everything that was happening. And then my fight or flight response, all I ever wanted to do was fuck people up. All I ever wanted to do was get into a fight with people. Like they got too close to me and I'm like, what? I'm gonna fuck you up. Like my brain like just shut down. So it was a really hard time. And you know, being on this side of the movement, I'm like, we have a responsibility to talk about these conversations that are taboo.
We absolutely do. Because other people aren't talking about it. And you know, we put trigger warnings on our content. We put like mature rating on our content, because these conversations need to happen. Right. There are other organizations and other movements who don't talk about it.
Right.
That's fine, but our community needs this.
Right.
Because it's, you know, I don't know if this stereotype exists in America, but in Britain the stereotype is that if you were raped, if you were sexually assaulted, if you were sexually attacked, you won't want to have sex again. That's not how that works.
Let me tell you, that's not true.
Like
that's not true.
Said to me with when I was raped, within 48 hours I was having sex again.
Oh wow.
And yeah, I was really quick on the mark. I was like drunk. I was like, anything that I can do to like not feel, just like give me alcohol and an orgasm, thank you. And like one of the first things that were said to me by some idiot in my college whose opinion I took too close to heart, but I shouldn't have. He said, well, I know you weren't raped because you had sex. No, you know, looking back on that at the time, I took that internally.
Right.
Looking back on it now, I hope that he is watching this because he needs to be educated.
I know. And that's honestly, I think about that with so many people when they say shit where I'm like when there's a lot of times, like I read comments online sometimes, I'm like, and I'm learning to stop because like people always tell me the bigger the organization gets, the more comments they're going to be. So just don't read the comments.
Yeah.
But like from time to time, I do read the comments. And then I'm like, the level of ignorance in people's comments, like when I see them and I'm like, okay, I was 17 when I went through this. I was 18 and there was no one having these conversations. And I had to fuck up and get re-traumatized along the way. Fuck my brain up even more to the point that my PTSD is super severe. And, you know, I don't want that for the next generation of women. So yeah, I'm going to have an uncomfortable conversation whether or not you like it, because it's going to be a resource for someone who's going through it and they're like, holy shit, I'm dealing with this. I need to enroll in therapy. And by the way, I'm not alone. So let me get involved in this community. I don't need to kill myself. I can get help and I can navigate this territory. And it's like, so I see certain things just even from people online, and I'm like, I'm just going to disregard everything you have to say in your entire comment because, like, you know how teachers say there's no stupid, like, question?
There is.
There's plenty of stupid comments on Facebook, like super stupid, where I'm like, and sometimes it is from organizations that are like dealing with people in the MST community. And I'm like, you're doing such a disservice to your community because you're not giving them the tools and resources and the education they need to be empowered.
Yeah.
Just because you're too scared to talk about it. And to me, that tells me you're not at a point in your healing process to be leading people.
Yeah. And if anyone is watching this and their reaction to sexual trauma was the complete opposite of us, and you went down the hyposexual line and fell on the asexual spectrum, please reach out because we would love to hear your experience.
Yeah, I mean, I had that conversation with a couple of guys who's told me that they've gone through sexual violence and became asexual. And like that's the only thing is like you can't force people to come forward, right? Like people in your communities, there's people who talk to us behind the scenes that engage with us just to confide in us for community stuff. So it's like, yes, there's people all over the spectrum, but also we can't ask people to have hard conversations that are taboo, that nobody in American society is talking about, and be like, hey, do you want to be the first one? You know,
but if anyone does want to be the first one, that's what I'm saying. I'm not.
Right, but that's like honestly, that's why when like really provocative content comes out, like I make sure it has heat in it, because I'm like, when the heat comes out, I'll deal with the heat and keep it moving. Where like it could impact somebody's mental health to come out and people are like, oh my God, you were asexual. Oh my God, you were hypersexual. That is so wrong. And it's like, shut the fuck up. Like how I handled myself the whole way is the best that I could for me to survive. So shut the fuck up. Like,
and that's also completely disregarding people who didn't go through sexual trauma, who are just asexual. People are still bisexual even without sexual trauma. People are still asexual. So for somebody to turn around and say, this is wrong, you shouldn't feel this way, well, you're not just disregarding victims of MST, but you're also disregarding the entire LGBT community.
Yeah. Like, you're also like, you're shaming people for their sexuality. You're shaming people for, you know, like rape culture. Like you're upholding white supremacy. Like 100%. You're upholding white supremacy. And when you do not allow these conversations to come forward, you become a gatekeeper to white supremacy. And I think that that's something that needs to be said out loud, because white supremacy has been the forefront and the core of rape amongst women and minorities. And on top of it, sexuality and women's bodies in politics have always been controlled through the fabrics of white supremacy. So like anytime that you're not allowing these conversations to come forward, and even in the education system in some states where they're like, talk about abstinence, and you're like, that's like being like, don't ever drink water. You know what I mean? Like nobody's ever going to listen to that advice because biology is telling you otherwise. So your statement is false. So, naturally you're going to listen to biology. If you're thirsty, you're going to go that way, right? So if you have a sex drive, you're going to go that way. And it's like you look at the hands of white supremacy who are like, let's talk about abstinence. And at the same time, what happens? Those states have the highest rates of teenage pregnancy.
Yeah.
And then those same states are like, well, you can't get an abortion. And then you look at the motherhood poverty rates in those states, and they're the highest. And you're like, white supremacy. So it's like, I look at different organizations and how they think. And I'm like, we're here to destroy white supremacy. We're here to create equality, and we're here to have honest and hard conversations, no matter how hard they are to have, and like, that's where we stand. So it's like, when people are like, don't talk about this, don't talk about that. Like, for me, it's like easy to be like, fuck you. You're going to be on the wrong side of history. Like, I am not worried about you, honey. You know what I mean?
Like even, I've received, being a plus size woman, I've received fat phobic comments before. Well, fat phobia is tied to white supremacy.
Oh yeah.
100%. And like, if someone wants to throw a fat comment at me, they're more than welcome, because at least I'm not the racist one.
Right. But like, people don't realize, like, there's people who really don't, like, they're not, their level of intellect is not high enough for them to know that they're playing into white supremacy. You know what I mean? Like, they don't know that. They're just like, I'm just prude, or I just don't believe in that. And that's why I feel that way. And you're like, no, there's this thing called propaganda. And you've been brainwashed to think that way, and your mind cannot get out of the mold.
Yeah.
And you expect everyone else to be of lower consciousness and not get their brain outside of that mold. And it's like, I'm woke. I've been through this circumstance. I've been through this. I know what the journey and the struggle entails. And I am committed to making sure that the next generation of young people have the tools, the resources, the knowledge, and the education they need to thrive.
Yes.
And I'm not going to be silenced because of your opinion.
Yeah. If you don't, if you're not into kink, that's fine. But don't shame other people for being in it.
Right. Right. Annalyn said, Mama and I had this conversation today.
Hey.
And Jackie said, hey, all. And Annalyn said, ooh, Janelle, and that shirt. I don't know if you can see it, but it's actually a bodysuit. And it's a very provocative bodysuit at that. You look extremely beautiful tonight. Aw, I love the compliments coming in. Don't forget to read the comments for Ellie. Love the outfit.
That was Corey.
Of course. Yeah, I think like people just kind of like have to get over they just got to get over being rude and like stop upholding the patriarch. Like, I'm not about that. I'm like the number one rebel when it comes to the patriarch.
Yeah. Like, if I came on here as if we were two guys and I was like, yeah, I had this threesome, like, people would be like, yeah, like high-fiving me in a locker room or some shit. But as a woman, if I say that, it's like, ew.
How dare you?
Yeah,
how dare
there's
you?
A clear double standard there.
Like, how dare you enjoy your sex life after going through sexual violence and everything was taken away from you and your life was destroyed? How dare you ever enjoy yourself? Like, no, I'm not going to stay a prisoner for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
Like
how dare like three people enjoy each other and give each other orgasms consensually?
Right.
Like,
I think as long as everyone is consenting and old enough to consent, then by all means, you do what you got to do. Yeah. But like, for me personally, like, threesomes is not my thing. No. That's like not something I would ever do. Like, a threesome for me, like, the idea of it is a turn off. Like, I need me and one man, and I need that guy to care about me and like protect me, like, while we're in the middle of a fantasy. You know what I mean? Like, I think because of the amount of trauma that I've been through and like the types of trauma that I've been through, I don't want to feel overpowered. And like, I need a guy who's very like gentle with me with the boundaries. Like the boundaries are really firm, and like he can be loving and tough and sexual at the same time.
Yeah.
But like knows what my limits are, and like that I feel safe with him so I can enjoy myself. But like for me to do that with multiple people, like I can't do all that. Like my brain would just be like, get me out of here.
Yeah, it's, you know, I think it's, for me, I think I just I'm bisexual. So,
Yeah.
you know, if I'm with a woman for a long time, I start to crave a man. And if I'm with a man for a long time, I start to crave a woman, you know? So it's, you know, it's not every time I have sex, because that would be like a lot of work, you know?
Yeah.
But occasionally I'll dabble.
Yeah, and well, see, I don't dabble that way, but like honestly, even when it comes to sex, like I'm very particular because like for me to enjoy myself, like I need to be at a certain level with someone emotionally. You know, like I need to know he has protective instincts. He's gonna protect me like in every possible way for me to be able to go down that road. And we have a comment that says more people means more trust is required. Yeah. And
Yes.
like you're
Yes.
talking about someone who doesn't really like to trust people, and it takes a lot to win my trust over. So like imagine me and a whole crew of people, like hell no, I feel like I'm gonna start karate chopping people. I'm gonna like I'm gonna get the fuck
Yeah.
away from me. Like I'm
Yeah,
gonna have like a bad
it makes
flashback.
complete sense why, you know, the thought of a threesome or more is like a turn off for you. Like my thing is, if somebody cannot have a healthy conversation about sex,
Yeah.
you're not fucking me. Like
Right.
it's not gonna happen
Yeah.
in your wildest dreams, right?
Like I feel like even with like porn in general, like I don't like regular porn, but I'll watch hentai, which is like Japanese anime porn. And like I'll
I've
watch some
never heard of
weird
that until now.
oh what?
I've never heard of that.
Oh, what? You've never heard of hentai? Hentai
Oops. I
is
know what I'm doing this evening.
it's Japanese porn, and it's anime, but like porn. And yo, and some of the shit is way hardcore. Like there's so many genres within it. But like I can watch anime, like I can watch hentai porn, and like I can watch stuff like I can watch a threesome and be okay. You know what I mean? But like me ever doing it is not gonna happen, or like me watching three actual people in a threesome, like I'm not gonna be down for that. Like it's just
I am Googling hentai porn the second this live is finished.
no, there is, I'm telling you, there's some weird ass shit because like sometimes they're not even human. Like sometimes the characters are like outer space beings that fuck, and you're like, I don't know what I'm watching right now.
But
Like
there
it's
may even,
crazy.
you know, there's, you know, with that, it's kind of a slight separation from reality, right? Because obviously none of us are having sex with
Right,
aliens, I'm assuming.
right,
So I can imagine that for people who have gone through sexual trauma, but, you know, still want to get that orgasm, that
right,
having that distance from reality within your pornography, yeah, I can see
right.
that being good for people.
But that's what like that's why I do that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Because like sometimes when I've tried to watch porn, and when I've tried to watch it, sometimes it triggers me more than it turns me on, depending on like what happens. So especially if like certain it's weird, but if certain scenes happen of things I actually went through in the military, like it fucking triggers the fuck out of me.
Yeah.
And I'll be like, I can't watch this, you know? And then I'm like, I need to get off. Like, I need to have an orgasm, and I'm not denying myself an orgasm. Where like with hentai, like it said, it's cartoons, and the cartoons are all like, there's so many different genres that you can watch within hentai that like you just explore what you like. And like, yeah, some of it is like so unrealistic that they're like in outer space fucking, and you're like, I could watch this. Like this isn't triggering for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no one's, experienced that in real life. So
Right.
it's not gonna trigger you.
Or like not in this universe, maybe another multiverse, but like
Maybe as some sort of other dimension.
yeah, it's like stuff like that. But I think and that's what I mean. All like these topics are so weird because like think about seeing somebody new, right? And like you're starting to date them, and then they're like, "So what are you into?" And then they're like, "Oh,
Hentai.
you're you're fucking freaky as fuck." And you're like, "Yeah. So why are you into that?" And then it's like you're explaining like this whole storyline of like, well, here's some trauma I've been through. Here's my backstory. Here's what I like.
Like we've been on like 2 dates. You're not ready for that yet. Like
Yeah. And like the thing with dudes is like dudes love to move to sex right away. And you're like, let's pace this. Because if we fuck right now, I'm not gonna like you and I'm not gonna call you back. And the sex is not gonna be good because you're gonna want to have vanilla sex and I'm not.
Yeah.
And it's like one of those topics that like I always try to like get guys to understand where I'm like, we gotta slow down. Like if we're having a hookup, like I'm not gonna be interested in you after this point because like you're not gonna turn me on the way I need to be turned on because like in your minds, every woman's the same way, but like I'm mad complex. So I'm like, what I like, if you're gonna throw it down in the bedroom really, really good, you need to know a lot about what I like and what my limits are.
Like women aren't a formula. Like we don't all want to be fucked the same way.
But you'd be surprised how many guys think that.
Like, yeah.
Like there's guys that are like, oh, like if I hit your D spot, it's good, and then you're like, no, like I need role play, like I need some, we need some talking here, like there's gotta be like it's gotta be an extravagant event for me to like zone in on you and be turned on.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I'm disassociating and I'm fantasizing in la la land, and I'm not thinking about you. And if I disassociate during sex, you and I are never gonna have sex again because like that already tells me like I'm not gonna have a fulfilling sex life with you.
Yeah.
And, like I'm not gonna be living in a fantasy, reliving my trauma over and over again with the person I'm having sex with. You know what I mean? Like I want a fulfilling sex life that I really enjoy and that I enjoy with my partner and like he just gets me, you know what I mean? And like he puts it down.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, whoo, that got deep quick. So everything you need to know about all the taboos. If you guys have any other taboos that you want to talk about or bring up, just let us know, we will bring it up on another mature live. We have to say that because sometimes we do live based on legislation. That's like what we're doing politically. And sometimes we do educational stuff. A lot of our educational stuff is mature content because it's not stuff that is spoken about publicly. So, if you guys have questions, just message us. If you have a topic you want us to talk about, like this was the topic everybody was asking us to talk about, like hypersexuality and BDSM. And we can go more into BDSM in the future, like when the movement matures a little bit more, because there's so many layers to that and there's so many layers to kinks. But I think this was a good introduction to the fact that pretty much everybody, in our organization has some kind of kink or some kind of fetish or some type of like BDSM, something that's taboo that like regular people who are healthier and haven't gone through trauma might not like might not go through.
Mm-hmm.
But if you guys have topics to bring up, you just let us know. We are not going to judge you for asking questions. If you make stupid comments, then you might get judged. Just to let you know.
Yeah.
If you're like, why are you talking about this? Like, I'm not going to entertain you.
Yeah.
Like,
you won't get a response.
Yeah, but like if you guys have like really good legitimate conversations that are going to add value to the community, we're going to have a conversation about it. Like we're not scared to have these conversations. Like we're bold we're progressive. Entitling progress also means that we educate our community to the best of our ability on these topics. You know, and before we wrap up, what I do want to tell everyone is have safe, consensual sex. Make sure that you are having a dialogue on consent before your clothes come off. When your clothes are coming off and then you're like stopping the boundaries, it's too late. So make sure that you're setting the standards and the boundaries before the clothes come off, right? Like, consent's important, understanding that someone's on the same page, understanding that they're not under the influence, right? Like, people cannot consent while they're under the influence. So just do the right thing, take the right actions, make good choices, make healthy decisions, and have a healthy sex life that you feel empowered.
Yeah.
And yeah, this is good too. Make sure you have the consent conversation before anyone has any alcohol.
Yes.
Definitely do that. I also think, like, if you're really gonna get it down and dirty, like, don't get wasted. Like,
Yeah, I
if
prefer
you're
not
gonna
to.
bang, like, maybe 1 or 2 drinks, like, not 4 or 5 in. Like, once you're 4 or 5 in, it's like you don't even know the person in front of you or what their name is. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you are, or have a conversation about consent while you're not under the influence of any drugs, any alcohol, anything your clothes are on. And then also, if you do start drinking and you know you're going to have sex or you want to have sex, limit your alcohol and substance consumption.
Please.
Right. And if you decide that you want to play around with substances more, because whether or not we tell you to do that, you're going to make your own choice, then refrain from sex and putting yourself in situations that might endanger you. You know what I mean? So, you know, just make good decisions, make healthy choices, and have healthy conversations about sex. Like, it's okay. You know, have these real conversations with your friends and your family. It's necessary, especially part of everyone's healing process. That we have to stop acting like sex is taboo and that, like, Jesus is going to kill us for having sex. It's a biological function. There's 7 billion people on the planet. You know, we need to have these conversations surrounding sex, and we need to make sure that consensual sex is the conversation we're always having, the conversation we're always promoting, and what that looks like. And hopefully today or tonight's conversation gave you a little bit of insight into that. So we want you guys to have a good weekend, have fun, and have a nice, safe sex life. All right.
Safe, sane, and consensual.
Yes, safe, sane, and consensual sex.